GabSmacked, I want my chocolate. I want my chocolate. Where are you going? Give me my chocolate.
If you want the full summary, don't forget to go to YouTube and go to the Speaking Human playlist. You will see a summary plus earlier episodes. So, what are we up to thus far? Ciao ciao. Spero che tu va bene, come sempre. Ehi, vai bene. What are we up to thus far? This person has been living a life of abuse, and it's a life of misery, a life of abuse, a life of confusion, a life of not understanding even their own confusion and what that actually means. They are disturbed, they don't know why they're disturbed, and they feel like they're being they feel like they're being punished. This is Jamil. Okay, this is the true story of Jamil Levant, being my stage name. All right. We are now up to a time where they're about 8 years old. So they've already been experiencing this for many, many, many years by the time that they're 8. The memories were described by Jamil like a constant flow of unwanted guests into what was once a peaceful, sun-filled room. And that's important because it shows that the intrusions of bad memories now, an early form of PTSD, is happening through this 8-year-old. And they also have a memory of when they didn't have those memories. So that's a problem too. And so the discrepancy shows them this level of depression that's sort of been increasing, this anxiety and everything else by the age of 8. So it starts very young. EJ. All right. And the worst part about it was that he wanted to be accepted by other human beings. So if you picture someone more like Newt Scamander, that was more how I was growing up. But I have learnt to modulate my behavior. And I'm very lucky that I've been able to do so for many different reasons. Hello again. Okay, so what would happen is that the videos of past traumatic memories would fill up the room of the mind so that what Jamil was supposed to be doing was not something he could think of. He didn't even know. His mind was so clouded with these memories. And as Jamil got older, by the time he was 8 or 9, controlling those memories became a problem. And so now it was no longer that the memories were filling the room, it's that the memories were the room. They took over. There was no him anymore in this room. Actually, Jamil, when he started to get 8 or 9, started to worry that perhaps other people could hear, sense, or feel the memories that he was experiencing because they were so loud in his own head. It was almost like being inside a nightclub. It was pulsatingly, vibrationally loud and destructive to his own mind. I thought other people must be hearing this. But no, his skulls were soundproof. The bullies started coming in, and he said how they aimed high. Now, there's a pun there, because they aimed high because Jamil was normally the tallest one. So growing up, I normally was pretty much the tallest person around. But that didn't stop the awkwardness attracting venomous taunts from the bullies. And don't forget, you can get a copy of this from me. Actually, I'm doing them at below cost now at GabSmacked, because I've got an extra 2,000 sitting in the garage. So paypal.me/GabSmacked if you want a copy. Just give me your postal address and $19, and I'll shoot over with a signed copy, because postage is a killer. All right. So the headmistress called my mother in, Jamil's mother, to figure out why this kid was continuously being ridiculed, harassed, and bullied. This was weird because it showed Jamil Rebel that teachers thought that his mother was important in this negotiation. Now, why is that important? It's because Jamil did not have a connection with his mother growing up. And part of it was autism, part of it that his mother had a tough life and so was very busy becoming hyper successful. A combination of these things. But she turns out to be the savior of the book towards the end, but you don't know that at the beginning. She's estranged from him at the beginning. Thanks for inviting. All right, so Jamil told his mother, somebody bullied this guy, Jamil told his mother that he could not handle school anymore. Now, his mother, this is going to sound harsh, and then I'll explain what actually happened, Metal Balls. His mother said, only people who are retarded can't handle things. Are you telling me you are retarded? Now, this is the beginning of why the book's called The Retarded Genius. Now, I thought maybe I was, but Jamil said to his mother no and gathered all the strength he could muster to pick up his bag and go out of the car. And she said, have a good day, you will be fine. Now, we have to ask ourselves why someone who seemingly seems so cold when in fact they were so unbelievably loving. And you've got to figure out why that would happen. Now, you don't notice at the beginning. What you think is that the mother is quite harsh. Now, the mother of Jamil grew up in a very harsh environment. And she actually does have a sister who is legally, clinically retarded and has been in an institution her whole life, being my auntie. And what we do is we actually put this a little bit in context, where Jamil's mother, when she came to Australia, could only speak French and Maronite Lebanese. And she was quite bullied, and I think she was bashed on her first day. And when she got home, she was crying and bleeding. And her father said to her, and her father, saw her as his favorite. He said to her, either you take those girls down or you never come home again. And so she had no choice. And the next day, when those 3 girls were facing her to bully her, she tore them apart piece by piece, with her teeth, with her nails, with every single thing she could muster. And she decided that from that point on, no one would ever mess with her. And despite the fact that many people in her family told her she wouldn't amount to anything, she became the first woman to achieve heaps of things in Australia, and was hyper successful, unbelievably strong. She doesn't even know what a glass ceiling is. In fact, people like my mum actually make a glass ceiling for men. Like that's how much in Lebanese you call that a wahash. It means beast, but it's like really, really powerful. And so she learned to be tough, to be stoic, to put her feelings inside. And so when she saw Jamil, myself, being abused or complaining that he was being abused, she wanted to sort of breed that out of him in the way her father did with her. But it didn't really work. Wins or life. Okay. Now, the funny thing is, though, that her father said to her, he said, people can take away your loved ones and your wealth, but they can never take away what's up here. He was the one who told her to study. Now, that's all amazing. The irony is that he's now suffering from dementia. So it's a bit cruel how the world works. So it turns out it was God or life or dementia or whatever it was that took away what was in his mind in the end. So that's that part of the book, or fluoride. Fluoride could do it. Yeah. All right. So the next part was Father Sam Simon. Father Sam Simon and someone else called Sam Simon, actually, both of whom were people that were significant figures for Jamil in his life. Now, Father Sam Simon was unbelievably charismatic, and Jamil could notice that. He would notice that in the fact that he was the opposite of Jamil. So Jamil could tell that he was repellent somehow. Humans would move away from him like he had leprosy, as we mentioned in the last episodes of this series. And what he noticed was that he was drawn to people who were the opposite. So Father Sam Simon would draw women to him and guys who wanted to be like him, despite the fact that he was a priest, and people would flock to masses and that on the Sunday. And Jamil was fascinated. Now, the interesting thing about Father Sam Simon is that he gave attention to Jamil as much as he gave attention to everybody else. And Jamil found that euphoric, fascinating. There was a friend, someone who treated him as a human being, who seemed to be immune to this leprosy or repellent nature that Jamil seemed to have as an effect on most people. And Jamil wanted to be like him. One of the desires that moved Jamil from a young age was to attract people, to have all these people around him. Ironically, now that that's disappeared, now is the time that I'm actually getting the people that I'm not even barely interested in now as I was before. So what this priest would do was ask Jamil how he was. How are you? And Jamil couldn't understand what that meant, myself, my younger self. So I never answered because I didn't know, Chewy Chewbacca, that question required a response. I didn't know that until my early 20s, actually. Until about after my suicide, actually. My first psychiatrist explained to me / Jamil that why people say, how are you? Which I've explained in the bigger speech, I explained what how are you means, etc. Good to see you, as always. So other kids Jamil's age would run around with adults conversing nonsensically to each other, yet not moving around like people my age. So I noticed that adults were moving at a slower speed, and that used to bug me. I said, when I grow up, I don't want to be like that, which is why I still exercise every day. They must have spent the energy when they were still young, if they ever were. So this is an interesting concept, because some of these thoughts are what we did think as kids and what kids do think. You wonder how they ever were young, if that's even possible, and if they were, they must have used up that energy. Good to see you as always, Chewy. And so I'll give you a fake Scottish accent as a shout out to you. My Scottish accent is quite bad, you know. It's imitating the guy from The Simpsons. Give him a 2 fire-breathing whores. All right. So happy I was for the other kids, but so sad that I knew it would never be me, that they would ask to stupidly run around with them, which is quite interesting because he wanted to be asked to run around, but he knew it was stupid. Brigadoon. All right. Now, sad for himself was a feeling of comfort. So Jamil had a friend, and that friend was loneliness, and that friend would metastasize into suicidal depression in years to come. So that's the genius and bully section of the book. The next section we're going to talk about is Follow Me. Follow Me is when Jamil was noticed to be brilliant by his brother Micah. Micah wouldn't talk that much. Micah's also on the spectrum, but in a different way. And we can get into that. That'll be in future stories. I might do a book on Micah. Now, what Micah noticed was that Jamil was being called talented and gifted in piano. So that was where people thought Jamil's talents lay. And we talk about the talking whiz kid, which I've actually scoped about. And what it would do would play a certain series of notes, and Jamil would remember them and play them back. And he actually beat the system where the thing ended and then there was nothing else to do. So there's a story in there about Micah picking that up and remembering that Jamil could do this seemingly impossible feat of remembering a series of 20 to 30 notes all, in succession correctly where they're supposed to be, and actually defeat the system. And that was an experience that we talk about in Follow Me. The next one was Faith and Music. This is where Jamil starts to spend more time with his older cousins who were related through his father's sister. And he started to understand race at this time. This is interesting. So a lot of the things that Jamil is discovering are things that most of us discover intuitively, but he's trying to compute these logically, right, and consciously, because that's what happens when you don't have theory of mind. You have to process things externally and try to write them in tabular form in your head. And lucky because of the savant memory that my brain is able to recall things when it needs. And that's one of the huge advantages that my autistic brain has been able to have in order to mimic human behavior enough to fit into society, well, unfortunately, probably too much. Now, what do we got here? The interesting thing about it was that these cousins of Jamil were, if you looked at them, you would think they were Middle Eastern. So my older cousins on that side are naturally very dark. They don't have olive skin; they have Arabic skin. So it's naturally like a matte brown. And they're very hairy, very, very thick beard. So they still shave, but if they don't shave after 2 or 3 hours, it starts to come out. Very thick black eyebrows, thick black hair. So none of that he thought was important, but he did notice after a while, as he got older, that there would be different comments. Now, the reason it was interesting was because they assimilated into Australian culture way better than Jamil did. Jamil was in a much more secluded environment with his parents and his father who spoke Arabic to him all the time. So their accents were, "G'day, buddy." That's how they speak, which is the general Australian accent. If you see them today, you would think, a couple of potential terrorists are walking up to you and then they're like, "G'day, mate, how you going?" Completely Aussie, love their rock, heavy metal. One of them was a bass guitar player, another one was a drummer. So one of them was a guitar player, like completely what you would think is Aussie culture. And the interesting thing about it was the comments that would be made about their appearances and that they would make about their own appearances and that we didn't look as Middle Eastern as them and etc. So this idea of looking different was quite interesting at that point. And this was especially interesting to Jamil because, as we said earlier, Jamil wasn't accepted even by the other quote-unquote Lebanese kids at school because he didn't look Lebanese enough, even though he could speak Lebanese better than they could and read and write later on as well. So it was interesting that he was noticing a difference between ethnicity and culture, and appearance and culture, and effects of what group you're assigned to based upon how you look from the outside. And then how you act can change things as well psychologically. So it's very interesting stuff. Now, what happened was that their father had actually been a member of the Communist Party in Lebanon, and so was heavily persecuted back in a time where Lebanon was sort of a Catholic, right-leaning European-based country. And so coming to Australia brought that anti-capitalist, Catholic rhetoric, which is not good or bad. Everyone's got their own thing, so it's nothing to do with that at all. But the reason it's important in this case was because when Jamil dropped his Lebanese bread on the ground when he was staying over their house, when he picked it up, he kissed it and made the sign of the cross on it. That's what I did because I had learned to do that from my parents. And I thought that that's what everyone did, because as a kid, you think everyone does what you do. And my own cousins laughed at me and said, why would you do something as stupid as that? And that was the first time ever that I thought that it could be possible that someone could think that some Christian rituals that I had learned were stupid. And obviously, as an 8 or 9-year-old believer, right, or whatever you are, raised as that way, you're going to think that there's something wrong with them. And I actually went to my parents and said, how can they say that? And they said, don't worry, they'll find their way, or whatever it was. Quite interesting stuff. So what have we got here? We then talk about how Jamil's father would sing music to Jamil, and Jamil would then play it instantly on the piano. So it's showing you that Jamil's clearly a gifted child, but it seems that he's gifted only in piano by this time. Okay. Then that talent spilled over Captain Deltron to Father Sam Simon. Now Sam Simon's going to take more of an interest in Jamil because of his exceptional musical abilities, according to what they would define as that. And that's when Jamil was introduced to someone called Harold. And Jamil describes facial recognition problems when meeting these people. He would try to measure their smiles. Thank you for inviting, as always. And he would talk about when he would play piano, he would close his eyes and he could see the music as colors in his head and would follow those colors as he made the music. And the last thing we'll talk about in this episode was speed. And this is where Jamil discovers speed. And he's spent all of his time on his bike. He then gets a new bike at the age of 10, which is a much more high-performance vehicle, and is able to start working out the mathematical relationships between certain gears and ratios, etc. And by this time, he's been riding for so many years that he's become extremely fit, and he's also very tall and hit puberty quite early. So he's able to pedal by the age of 15, which we haven't gotten to yet, at 40 miles an hour on a flat surface quite easily. And he's now learned at a younger age, catch you again, ragazzo. He's able to learn to travel very fast on a bike, on a push bike. And of course, at someone who's at 10 and 11 years old, this is basically like giving them a driver's license, because they can travel unbelievably fast and they don't need a license, seatbelt, anything else. And at speed, he didn't have to worry about people's behavior. And it was allowing him to actually calculate angles of moving other vehicles, other positions, how trees swayed, etc., etc. And it's showing you how the autistic brain is mapping out the synthesis of details. This is very common to people on the spectrum. They see lots of details, like now I just heard the bird chirp twice and then the other bird responded once, and you can replay this and have a listen if you pick it up. So I hear lots of different details, and the synergy of putting them together is something that someone with autism can do quite well if they can overcome the overwhelming sensation of different stimuli coming in. And the next part, actually no, this is before we meet Sabrina. This will be our last part. Before we meet Sabrina, we're talking about the death of Greenacre. Yeah, so what Jamil was realizing, because of his attention to detail, he knew which culture was in each house. By this time, he knew the difference between Anglo-Saxon working class and Lebanese Christian working class and Lebanese Muslim working class neighbors, their cultures, how many cars they would have, what type of cars they would have, what noises they would have, what type of curtains they would have, whether they had couches outside their house or not, the frequency of people visiting them or not. He would know which type of culture was there and what they would wear when they left the house, etc. Now, what he noticed was those details were shifting. As he grew up, less Lebanese Christians were there and less Australian blue-collar workers were in Greenacre, and it was starting to become more Arabized. And he noticed this change, and there was some violence that would occur, some of it upon him, some of it upon his family for having the cross in the car, etc. And this is not an attack on people of Arabic culture at all. There's always going to be a minority that do this. This is not the majority, of course, but it's a different culture. And he noticed this starting to happen, and then somebody said to his father that, anything we can take from you Christians is a blessing from God. This does not represent all Muslims. This just happened to be one person. But this is what Jamil was starting to notice. And he didn't even understand that this could happen, especially because he didn't know when he was younger the difference between Lebanese Muslim and Lebanese Christian. He thought it was all the same thing, ironically, like many people in the West think today, which is exactly not the case. So he talks about his relationship with his father and how it became more estranged as he grew up. Now, we now know why, in hindsight, with Honest Joe. Honest Joe is a very emotional, sort of a more maternal type of human being, where Jamil, being autistic, is an extreme male, masculine type of brain, very logical, mathematical. And masculine doesn't mean male, because a lot of women can have that too. In fact, I got that from my mother, it's called the extreme male brain hypothesis. It doesn't mean that all of their brain is male. It means that what we used to ascribe to masculine traits, things like, hyperlogic, less sensitivity to people's emotional needs, problems, identification with other people's emotional states, being exceptionally advanced at spatial reasoning, like statistics, mathematics, logic, sharp memory, less vocabulary, a higher vocabulary but less fluency. These type of things, which are related to testosterone and the male shape of the brain. So it can happen I think it's actually more common in women than we realize. But anyway, I think a lot of women here actually are like that. It's probably why they come here. Anyway, so there were two sides to his father. Because of being the emotional person, he would see everyone would love Honest Joe. Everyone loves Honest Joe. But living with Honest Joe was quite difficult because of the paranoia and the extreme violent outbursts. Perhaps, you never know. And the interesting thing that Jamil noticed was the difference at home versus outside, because outside Honest Joe would speak English. And Honest Joe's English is, "Hello, how are you? Come to my house. I like you very much." So it's a very, very cute and endearing accent that people liked. But when at home he would speak in Lebanese, and in Lebanese he would sound like this: "Hey mate, how are you? I specifically instructed this thing." Right? There's no accent. So my brain is hearing it in Lebanese, but it translates it to whatever right now in front of you. That it sounds fluent because he's speaking his first language. So you lose that sense of adorability or whatever cuteness that people experience when he speaks with the English accent. And as Grenica became Arabized, the interesting thing was that it caused Jamil to lose his sense of home, because it wasn't that he left his home, it's that his home disappeared. And so there wasn't a home to go to. And so he slipped further and further into depression because there was nothing fixed in his life. Now, the next part we get to, which I'll talk about in the next episode, will be Sabrina. Sabrina is a key role, a key figure throughout the whole book. He meets her when she's 12 and he's 8. And then constantly he meets her again, and she ends up becoming his fiancée, and she ends up introducing him to his latest girlfriend, which is at the beginning of the book, written by Adrienne. Adrienne talks about Auntie Sabrina. So that ends this part on our series of Speaking Human. As always, it's a pleasure to have you. I will update my project sheet that I've now done episode 5. And until next time, don't forget to take life one smack at a time. We'll get the message out. Autism will normalize it as much as we can throughout the world. All right, until next time.
You're welcome.